So, welcome everyone.
Snow White has supposedly finally crossed the $200 million worldwide mark, and I thought we should take a look at this momentous occasion. And by momentous, I mean staggeringly underwhelming to examine how Rachel Zegler is faring and where her career might be heading from here. Now, it's worth noting there's some discrepancy in the numbers. Looking at different sources, some put it at $195.2 million while Box Office Mojo has it at $200.21 million.
Let's be incredibly generous and go with the higher number, shall we? Let's just say it crossed 200 million and be gratuitously fair because after all, Snow White has been operating at such a handicap, right? But let's call a spade a spade. This film is a disaster on multiple levels. The performance is staggeringly bad. 200 million might sound decent until you compare it to the budget. Most reporting puts the production budget around $269 million, but that figure doesn't even tell the whole story. That number was accurate before the extensive reshoots.
So, the actual cost is likely pushing $300 million or more. Disney will get some tax kickbacks that reduce the overall expenditure. But for argument's sake, let's say the budget lands around $300 million. You've got to wonder why Disney would spend that astronomical amount on a film starring a relative unknown.
Rachel Zegler is essentially a newcomer.
If you check her IMDb, West Side Story was basically her first major role, and now Hollywood seems determined to make her happen whether audiences want it or not.
The problem is she's never been in a genuinely successful film.
Some might point to Snow White's audience scores. It's sitting at 72% on Rotten Tomatoes, but that's from the minuscule audience that actually bothered to see it. And with recent changes to how Rotten Tomatoes calculates audience scores, even that figure might be inflated.
The audience feedback tells the real story. It's terrible, as expected. With a 37% critic score, it's objectively not good. One verified review points out that the original Snow White was a 10 out of 10.
And if you're going to remake a classic like that, you need to actually remake it, not completely transform it into something unrecognizable.
What's interesting about my assessment is that the movie isn't bad because of Zegler. It's bad in spite of her. The writing is abysmal. The script is fundamentally flawed at its core. Even the greatest actress in the world couldn't have saved this train wreck.
So, with Disney hitting around the $200 million mark, they've made approximately $100 million from this film after theaters take their cut. And that's catastrophic when you factor in the production budget, plus what was likely another $100 million in marketing expenses, even with their reduced promotional campaign. Disney is essentially $200 million in the hole on this project. That's a staggering amount of money to lose on a single film. And you know, you clicked on this video for the headline. So, let's get to Rachel Zegler's current situation.
Her latest venture is the stage production of Evita at the London Palladium. She's starring as Eva Perón in what should be a prestigious high-profile role.
The marketing prominently features her as Golden Globe winner Rachel Zegler and mentions her roles in Disney's Snow White, West Side Story, and The Hunger Games.
This is not some small production. The London Palladium is a major venue for a major show.
But here's where it gets interesting. When you look at ticket availability for June performances, literally everything is available.
All of it. Every single seat for every single performance. The ticket website uses a traffic light system to indicate availability. And it's all green. Wide open. Nobody's buying tickets.
This is really bad news for someone who's supposed to be Hollywood's next big thing.
It demonstrates that Zegler simply doesn't have the drawing power that studios seem to think she had.
For comparison, I looked at other theater productions running concurrently, like John Lithgow's show, which has much more limited availability. That's what it looks like when you have an actor with actual drawing power. The whole Rachel Zegler situation perfectly illustrates Hollywood's current disconnect with actual audience preferences. They've been desperately trying to make her happen despite clear evidence that moviegoers aren't particularly interested. It's like watching a studio executive repeatedly slam into a brick wall, hoping it'll eventually turn into a door. To be fair, West Side Story wasn't entirely her fault either. Spielberg's remake arrived during a pandemic when theater attendance was still recovering and musicals have been struggling at the box office for years. But after that underperformance, Disney still decided to gamble hundreds of millions on casting her as Snow White, one of their most iconic characters. What's fascinating is how the studio system continues to push certain actors regardless of their commercial viability. They create these echo chambers where everyone in the industry convinces each other that someone is the next big star without any concrete evidence to support it. It's reminiscent of how they handled actors like Shai Courtney or Sam Worthington, constantly casting them in major blockbusters despite minimal audience enthusiasm.
The box office numbers for Snow White tell a devastating story.
When you break it down, Disney has essentially lost around $200 million on this project. In the past, that kind of financial catastrophe would seriously damage a rising star's career prospects.
But Hollywood operates differently now.
They seem committed to certain casting decisions regardless of financial outcomes. What makes this particularly ironic is that Zegler herself didn't help matters with her pre-release comments about Snow White. In multiple interviews, she made statements that seemed dismissive of the original animated classic, describing the prince as stalkerish and suggesting the remake would correct the outdated elements of the 1937 film. These comments created a PR nightmare and alienated fans of the original before the movie even released.
When actors publicly criticize the source material they're adapting, it seldom ends well.
It sends a message to potential audiences that you don't respect or understand why they loved the original in the first place.
Compare this approach to how actors in successful adaptations typically handle press.
They emphasize their respect for the source material while highlighting how they're bringing something new to the table. The Evita situation is particularly revealing because stage productions are typically much more meritocratic than Hollywood films. Theater audiences are generally discerning and willing to pay premium prices for performances they believe will be worth their time. The complete lack of ticket sales for a major production at the London Palladium speaks volumes. You might argue that theater is a different medium requiring different skills, but performers who genuinely connect with audiences typically draw crowds across mediums.
Look at Hugh Jackman, who seamlessly transitions between blockbuster films. Established stars with genuine drawing power don't face empty theaters.
What's particularly fascinating is how the entertainment media continues to present Zegler as a major success story despite the evidence. Articles still refer to her as a Golden Globe winner for Best Actress in a comedy/musical for West Side Story.
As if that single award outweighs multiple box office disappointment, it's narrative creation in real time. The industry desperately trying to manifest the stardom they've invested in. The question becomes, how many commercial failures can a young actor survive before studios stop taking these enormous financial risks? Traditionally, the answer would be not many.
But the current Hollywood ecosystem seems determined to continue this experiment regardless of the financial warning signs. What's particularly strange about this whole situation is that audiences don't seem to actively dislike Zegler as a performer. As I mentioned earlier, Snow White's problems stem primarily from terrible writing and conceptual decisions, not her performance.
She's technically proficient and clearly has some talent.
The issue is that studios have thrust her into these massive, expensive productions without allowing her to gradually build an audience or demonstrate commercial viability.
This aggressive star-making approach rarely works in the modern entertainment landscape. Today's audiences have endless options and aren't easily convinced to support a performer simply because the industry has deemed them worthy of stardom. Star power builds organically through a combination of strong performances, smart project choices, and authentic audience connection. None of which can be manufactured through sheer force of studio will. If we look at successful young actors who've managed to build genuine drawing power, Florence Pugh, Timothée Chalamet, Zendaya, they typically followed a more measured path, mixing smaller critical darlings with strategic mainstream projects. They allowed their audience to grow naturally rather than being immediately positioned as the centerpiece of 300 million gambles. The situation with Evita and Snow White raises serious questions about what comes next for Rachel Zegler. When a star vehicle bombs at the box office and their stage production can't sell tickets, typical Hollywood protocol would suggest a career cooling-off period. Yet, the industry's investment in her seems unwavering despite these warning signs.
Her next major project was the Hunger Games prequel, The Ballad of Songbirds and Snakes, where she played Lucy Gay Bear. While the film performed decently, grossing around $330 million worldwide against a reported $100 million budget, it was part of an established franchise with a built-in audience.
Zegler wasn't the primary draw.
The Hunger Games brand was doing the heavy lifting. If I were a Hollywood executive looking at these numbers objectively, I'd be extremely hesitant to cast her as the lead in another big-budget production.
The data simply doesn't support the financial risk.
It's like watching someone repeatedly lose at the casino but keep doubling down on the same bet.
At some point, fiscal responsibility has to enter the equation.
What's particularly telling is that even after Snow White's disappointing performance, Disney still plans to release the film in China this June. They're clearly hoping for a miracle to mitigate their losses.
But the Chinese box office has become increasingly selective about which Western films they embrace.
Unless there's something about Snow White that specifically resonates with Chinese audiences, which seems unlikely given the cultural specificity of the fairy tale, this feels like desperation. The industry's insistence on manufacturing stars rather than allowing them to develop organically creates these painful situations. Rachel Zegler might have had a completely different career trajectory if she'd been allowed to build her resume gradually through smaller films and supporting roles. Instead, she's become the face of massive commercial disappointments before she's had time to establish herself.
This accelerated star-making process isn't just risky for studios.
It potentially harms the actors themselves. When someone is thrust into the spotlight prematurely and attached to underperforming projects, it creates a narrative about their bankability that can be difficult to overcome. Fair or not, actors often get blamed for a film's failure, even when the problems lie elsewhere. What's particularly interesting about this situation is how it reflects broader shifts in entertainment.
Traditional star power doesn't guarantee success the way it once did.
Audiences are increasingly drawn to concepts, franchises, and storytelling quality rather than who's on the poster. The era of the movie star who can open any film based solely on their name has largely passed.
This creates a challenging environment for emerging talents.
Studios want bankable names to minimize risk, but it's harder than ever to become a bankable name. The result is a bizarre situation where studios keep trying to force create stars through massive projects rather than letting bankability develop naturally through consistently good work in appropriately sized roles. If we look at other young actors who have successfully built careers with staying power, they typically mixed prestige projects with commercial fare, independent films with studio productions. This balanced approach allows them to demonstrate range, build critical respect, and connect with different audience segments.
Zegler hasn't had this opportunity. She's been immediately thrust into enormous productions with equally enormous expectations. The key takeaway from all this isn't necessarily that Rachel Zegler lacks talent or potential. It's that Hollywood's approach to developing new stars has become fundamentally broken. The industry seems to have forgotten that audience connection can't be manufactured.
It has to be earned through consistent quality work that resonates with viewers.
So what would a smarter career path look like from here?
Ideally, a strategic retreat from leading massive productions. Taking supporting roles in well-received smaller films would allow her to rebuild credibility with critics and audiences without bearing the entire weight of a project's success or failure. A few solid performances in films that actually connect with viewers would do more for her long-term prospects than continuing to headline commercial disappointments.
Will the industry allow for this course correction? That remains to be seen.
Hollywood has a notorious difficulty admitting when its star-making machinery has misfired. There's an institutional resistance to acknowledging these mistakes because it reflects poorly on the executives who championed these casting decisions in the first place. If I were to make a prediction, I'd say we'll see the industry slowly distance itself from these massive investments in her as a leading lady. Not through any dramatic blacklisting, but through the quiet adjustment of casting decisions.
Studios simply can't afford to ignore the financial realities indefinitely.
The Snow White saga ultimately reveals much more about Hollywood's dysfunctional decision-making processes than it does about any individual performer. It's a case study in how the industry's echo chamber can lead to spectacular miscalculations when they lose touch with what audiences actually want.